Stepping out of the vehicle, Judge.
You may have forgotten, officer, but I am the law here.
You think that row protects you out here, Your Honor?
It represents the law, officer. Something you seem to have forgotten.
The red and blue lights shattered the calm of the rainy night. Aisha Monroe's car idled under the flickering street lamp, windshield wipers swiping in nervous rhythm. She'd just finished a late meeting downtown, a city judge off duty, wearing jeans instead of her black robe. The officer's flashlight cut through the drizzle, harsh and invasive. "License and registration," he said, voice flat, eyes already set with judgment. Aisha handed them over. "Is there a problem, officer?" His lip curled. "You people always think you can question authority. Keep your hands where I can see them." She froze. The words struck deeper than the rain could reach, "you people." Her pulse quickened. She wanted to say her name, her title, her courtroom number, but pride held her still. This was bigger than her. He circled her car, then barked, "Step out, ma'am." The flashlight beam climbed her face like an accusation. "Sir, I haven't, now." She stepped into the cold. Cars slowed to watch. One window rolled down, a phone camera catching the scene. Aisha's breath fogged the air. The officer's hand hovered near his holster, hands on the car. Her voice shook, but she held his stare. "You're making a mistake." He leaned close enough for her to smell the stale coffee on his breath. "Lady, I don't make mistakes." The rain intensified. So did the silence around them. A distant siren wailed, then faded. The flashlight trembled slightly in his grip. Aisha blinked against the water in her eyes. Then his radio crackled. "Unit 12, be advised, Judge Aisha Monroe's vehicle reported stopped on Highway 9. Confirm." The officer's hand froze. Their eyes met, her calm, his unraveling, and the world stopped breathing. Rain whispered across the windshield, a low, persistent hiss that blurred the city's distant lights. Aisha Monroe drove the empty stretch of Highway 9, humming softly to keep her mind from drifting. It had been a long day, back-to-back hearings, tense rulings, and a final meeting that stretched late into the night. Her phone buzzed in the console. A message from Daniel. "You okay getting home alone? Roads look rough tonight." She smiled faintly. "I'm fine, just tired, Dot." Then the lights appeared behind her, red, blue, relentless. Her chest tightened. She checked her speed, 45 well under the limit. She pulled to the shoulder, exhaling through clenched teeth. The cruiser idled behind her, engine growling. The beam of a flashlight cut through the rain, blinding her. "License and registration." The voice was sharp, impatient. She turned, lowering her window halfway. "Of course, officer." A voice carried the calm of someone used to command, deliberate, even. He leaned closer. The flashlight hovered on her skin. "You've been drinking tonight?" "No, sir." "You sure?" "Yes." "Where you headed?" "Home." He squinted. "From where?" She hesitated. "Work." "What kind of work keeps a woman like you out this late?" A muscle in her jaw flexed. "I'm a judge," he chuckled, short, mocking. "Yeah, and I'm the president." He stepped back, gesturing with 2 fingers. "Step out of the car. Officer out. Now." The rain thickened as she opened the door. Cold water soaked her shoes instantly. He motioned toward the trunk. "Hands where I can see them." Her hands lifted slowly, trembling slightly from the chill. "Do you know why I stopped you?" "No, officer." "Your tail lights busted." She turned. Both lights gleamed red through the drizzle. "It's not." His voice hardened. "Don't argue with me." From across the road, a car slowed. A phone glinted in a passenger's hand. Someone was recording. "You think filming me helps?" He sneered. "Try it. You'll just make it worse." Aisha's throat tightened. "I just want to understand what I did wrong." He stepped closer, close enough that the rain slid from his hat brim onto her shoulder. "You people always want to understand. How about you learn to comply first?" The words sliced clean through her. She wanted to shout, to remind him who she was, Judge Aisha Monroe, State Court, Division 4. But she didn't. She stood still, the cold eating into her hands, the rain matting her curls against her face. "Sir," she managed, "this isn't." "Turn around." The command cracked like a whip. Her breath hitched. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the wet surface of her car, dignified, silent, restrained. Then came the radio crackle. "Unit 12, confirmed stop on Judge Aisha Monroe's vehicle." The silence after was almost holy. Rayner's hand froze midair. His eyes flicked to hers, disbelief blooming into panic. "Judge," he whispered, the word almost drowned by the rain. Aisha didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her stare said everything, and as thunder rolled across the sky, the balance of power shifted. Quiet, devastating, irreversible. Morning broke with headlines instead of sunlight. By the time Aisha reached her chambers, her phone had already vibrated itself to exhaustion. Every screen in the lobby carried the same grainy clip: a police officer shouting under flashing lights, a black woman standing in the rain, refusing to break her face. Her silence, her restraint. The video had gone viral overnight. 10 million views, hundreds of thousands of comments, outrage, disbelief, venom, solidarity. Every opinion was a spark, and the city was catching fire. Daniel was waiting in her office, phone in hand. "It's everywhere," he said quietly. CNN, BBC, even local talk radio, they're calling it the Highway 9 stop. Aisha closed the door behind her, exhaling. "I didn't want this, I know, but people needed to see it." She moved to her desk, set down her bag, and stared at the faint tremor in her own hands. "They don't care about the truth, they care about outrage." Daniel frowned. That outrage might be the only thing that keeps him from walking free. Her office phone rang. She didn't move. The voicemail light blinked red. Chief of Staff, City Hall, then another police review board, and another, the mayor's office. The city was circling. When she finally answered, the voice was clipped, practiced. "Judge Monroe, this is Deputy Mayor Heller. We appreciate your cooperation while the department reviews the incident. We advise discretion. The public reaction is volatile. Please refrain from making statements that could escalate matters." "Escalate," Aisha repeated softly. "I was humiliated on the side of a road." "Yes, well, let's allow the process to work. We'll reach out for your statement soon." The line clicked dead. Daniel watched her, jaw tight. "They're protecting him." She turned toward the window. Outside, protesters were already gathering. Signs bloomed like flowers against the courthouse steps. "Justice for Aisha. No one above the law. End racial profiling." "I'm a judge," she said. "I'm supposed to believe in the process." Daniel stepped closer. "You believe in justice. That's not the same thing." Her phone buzzed again. This time, her mother. Aisha hesitated, then answered. "Baby, I saw the video. Lord, I thought my heart stopped. You didn't tell me. I didn't want you to worry." "How could I not?" "He could have." Her mother's voice cracked. "You could have died out there." "I didn't." A pause. "You're going to take action, right?" Aisha's gaze drifted back to the crowd outside. "If I do, it'll have to be through the same system that enabled him." Her mother sighed. "Then make the system answer for it." The line fell silent, and Aisha pressed her palm against her forehead. Every instinct told her to retreat, to hide behind procedure, behind her robe, behind the decorum of her title. But something deeper, older, and heavier burned inside her. By afternoon, the police department issued a statement. "The department is aware of an incident involving Officer Blake Rayner. We are reviewing footage and will conduct an internal investigation. The department has full confidence in our officer's professionalism." No apology, no admission, just words soaked in institutional armor. Daniel slammed the paper down. "Professionalism. He told you to learn to comply. They saw that and still wrote this. They have to protect their own," Aisha said. He stared at her. "And who protects you?" The question lingered in the air. Outside, sirens wailed, not for emergencies, but for protests swelling downtown. The city's pulse had shifted, and though she didn't want to admit it, so had hers. That night, alone in her apartment, Aisha rewatched the video, frame by frame, every flicker of light, every drop of rain, every twitch of fear. When the radio crackled and her title spilled into the air the way his eyes widened, she paused the video. That irony wasn't lost on her. Power had only protected her once the system recognized her value. She leaned back, whispering into the silence. What about all the women it didn't? Her reflection in the screen didn't answer, but something in her expression had changed. Not anger, resolve. The next morning, she sent a single email to her assistant. "Daniel, file notice of complaint with Internal Affairs. AM, the war had begun." The conference room smelled of polished wood and performance. Every surface gleamed. Every chair faced inward, toward the long, rectangular table where power pretended to be polite. Judge Aisha Monroe sat at one end, calm, precise, unreadable. Across from her, Police Chief Warren Griggs adjusted his cuffs, his uniform's gold pins catching the morning light. Beside him sat a department attorney, papers stacked like armor. Aisha folded her hands. You've seen the footage. Griggs nodded slowly. We have unfortunate optics. Optics, she repeated. That's your word for it. He leaned forward. Judge Monroe, we all respect your position, but Officer Rayner followed protocol. Protocol, she said, voice even. Is there a protocol for racial humiliation? The attorney cleared her throat. Judge, Internal Affairs is reviewing whether bias factored into his behavior. But the officer reported suspicion based on vehicle movement and Aisha cut her off. He lied. Griggs' expression stiffened. I understand you're upset. Upset. She leaned in now, every syllable honed like a blade. He accused me without cause, escalated without reason, and threatened me under color of law. I'm not upset, Chief. I'm disturbed that your department's first instinct is to defend him. The silence between them thickened. Griggs sighed. With all due respect, Judge Monroe, the department must avoid creating an appearance of bias against its own officers. If we publicly condemn him before the investigation, we risk lawsuits and union backlash. So your fear of lawsuits outweighs my civil rights. He didn't answer. Daniel, seated beside her, whispered, we can document this. Aisha nodded slightly, never breaking her gaze from the chief. I'll expect transparency in the investigation, all reports, body cam footage, witness statements. The attorney stiffened. Those are internal documents. And this, Aisha said quietly, is now a matter of public concern. Griggs adjusted his tie. Let's not make this adversarial. It already is. For a moment, the chief's jaw worked soundlessly. Then he stood, extending a hand. We'll be in touch. Judge, Aisha didn't take it. I'm sure you will. As she and Daniel exited the building, the cameras flashed outside. Local reporters, microphones thrust forward. Judge Monroe, do you believe the department is covering up misconduct? Will you testify against the officer? Do you fear for your safety? She kept walking, her silence speaking louder than any soundbite inside the car. Daniel exhaled. They're terrified of you. They're terrified of what I represent, she said. Accountability. He turned to her. Are you ready for what comes next? No, she admitted, but that's never stopped me. Later that afternoon, she was called to meet with Deputy Mayor Heller again. Same office. Same glass walls overlooking the city. He gestured toward the seat opposite him. Aisha, I hope you understand the political climate. The police union is already defensive. If we push too hard, we risk alienating them during the upcoming budget vote. She stared at him. So my dignity is a political liability. He gave a pained smile. You're misreading this. I'm reading it exactly right. He sighed. What if we issue a joint statement? Something about reconciliation, understanding no. You could diffuse tension, set an example of unity. I'm not here to be an example, she said sharply. I'm here to be treated like any other citizen who was harassed by an officer. Aisha, you wouldn't be asking a white judge to show understanding. That shut him up. The silence afterward wasn't diplomatic. It was heavy, honest. Finally, she stood. I won't play your optics game. If the system wants to test its fairness, then let it. I'll see it in court. As she turned to leave, Heller said softly, You're making enemies. She looked over her shoulder. No, I'm exposing them. That evening, back in chambers, Daniel entered with a stack of folders. Internal Affairs released preliminary statements. She raised an eyebrow. Already, he handed her the top sheet. Read the last paragraph. No sufficient evidence of racial bias was found. Officer Rayner acted within reasonable limits of suspicion. Her chest tightened. Reasonable limits. He gets to define reasonable, Daniel muttered. Aisha closed the file slowly, deliberately. Then we redefine it. She stood, moving toward the window. The courthouse lights flickered against the glass, casting faint reflections of both of them, two silhouettes facing the weight of an institution. They'll try to bury this, Daniel said. Move the headlines to something else. They can try, she replied, but not while I'm still breathing. Outside, rain began to fall again, soft at first, then harder, steady, relentless. The same rain from that night, the same reminder. A system built to protect itself. But this time, she wasn't the one standing in the storm. She was the storm. The city couldn't look away. Every channel carried her name. Every commentator dissected her silence, her composure, her tone. The viral clip had become national conversation. Power, race, law, restraint. The country was hungry for symbolism. And Aisha Monroe had become one. She never asked for it. By the end of the week, her chambers overflowed with letters. Some handwritten, trembling with empathy. Others cruel, dripping with hate disguised as patriotism. Daniel sorted through the pile. Half the city wants to hug you, the other half wants to hang you. Aisha looked up from her desk. Balance, I suppose. He frowned. That's not funny. It wasn't meant to be. Outside, the courthouse steps filled with protesters, chants echoing through the plaza. No justice, no peace. Signs bobbed under a white winter sky. Reporters swarmed like locusts, hungry for her reaction. By noon, she had 3 interview requests, national networks this time. She ignored all of them until one caught her attention. PBS, no shouting, no agenda, just quiet questions. She agreed. The studio lights were warmer than the rain, but they carried their own weight. The host, Mara Vance, greeted her with practiced calm. Judge Monroe, thank you for speaking with us. Thank you for inviting me. Mara leaned forward. You've remained mostly silent since the video surfaced. Why now? Aisha folded her hands in her lap. Because silence has become the story. I'd rather the story be truth. Do you believe race was a factor in your encounter? A small pause. I believe bias doesn't always wear a hood, Aisha said softly. Sometimes it wears a badge, a suit, or even a smile. The studio went still. Mara hesitated, then asked, some critics say you're using your position to pressure the department. Aisha looked directly at the camera. If demanding accountability is pressure, then maybe the system was built too fragile to handle it. For a long moment, the room held its breath. When the interview aired, that line trended instantly. Hashtag too fragile to handle it. Protests swelled. Editorials shifted tone. Even a few politicians, cautious and calculated, began to call for review of police procedure. But the reaction wasn't all praise. That night, an envelope slid under her apartment door. Inside, a newspaper clipping of her own face circled in red marker. No message, just a symbol drawn beneath it. A single, crude noose. Her hand trembled only once before she folded it neatly and placed it in a file marked evidence. 2 days later, Daniel barged into her chambers, pale and furious. He's back on duty. She looked up slowly. What, Rainer? They put him back on the street. Temporary reinstatement pending review. Her voice lowered. They didn't even finish the internal hearing. They don't care, he snapped. They're daring you to make a move, Aisha. She stood, her tone cold. Then I'll make one. Before he could respond, her assistant appeared at the door. Judge Monroe, the police review board is online too. She lifted the receiver. This is Judge Monroe. A clipped voice answered. We wanted to inform you, Officer Rainer has filed a complaint. He's accusing you of defamation. A slow exhale. For existing on camera, for publicly implying bias during your interview. Her mouth tightened. So now, truth is defamation. Judge, we recommend limiting public appearances until this resolves. She hung up without answering. By evening, the media firestorm had turned into a political one. Talk shows framed her as emotional, vindictive, dangerous for judicial neutrality. Anonymous sources whispered that her courtroom temperament was overly assertive. Daniel scrolled through the coverage, shaking his head. They're trying to make you angry so they can call you unstable. Let them, she said quietly. They'll underestimate me again. He studied her face. You look tired. I am. You should rest. I can't. She walked to the window. The city glowed beneath her, red and white lights threading through the streets like restless veins. Daniel, she said, you ever notice how every time someone black demands justice, the first response is tone, not evidence, not law, tone? He nodded slowly. Because tone's the easiest way to dismiss truth. A faint smile touched her lips. Then let's give them something they can't dismiss. That night, while the city argued about her tone, Aisha drafted a 24-page formal motion requesting judicial oversight of the department's internal review. Every paragraph was deliberate, every word cut clean. When Daniel reviewed it the next morning, he whispered, "This will make history." She looked at him, exhaustion and steel balanced perfectly in her eyes. History's overdue. Outside, reporters gathered again, expecting another sign. Aisha descended the courthouse steps slowly, the motion in her hand. The cameras trained on her. One reporter called out, "Judge Monroe, are you declaring war on the police?" She paused, met his eyes, and said evenly, "No. I'm reminding them the law applies to everyone." Flashbulbs erupted like lightning, somewhere in a precinct office across town. Officer Rainer watched that clip in silence, his reflection caught in the glow of his own badge. His lips tightened, his pride cracked. The storm had finally reached him. The courthouse was packed before sunrise. Reporters clustered outside the steps, microphones clashing with raindrops. Protest signs swayed among umbrellas. The city had come to watch justice argue with itself. Inside, the hearing room buzzed with tension. Oak benches filled with spectators, cameras perched like vultures. The case wasn't criminal. Not yet. It was a disciplinary hearing to determine whether Officer Blake Rayner had violated conduct codes. But everyone knew it meant more. It was about whether the system would finally look in the mirror. Aisha Monroe sat in the witness area, wearing the same calm expression she wore on the bench, but her pulse was a quiet drumbeat beneath her ribs. She wasn't here as Judge Monroe today. She was here as the woman who'd been forced to stand in the rain with her hands on her car. Across the room, Rayner sat in uniform, chin high, eyes full of defiance. His attorney whispered something that made him smirk. The hearing officer cleared his throat. "We'll begin with testimony from Judge Monroe." Aisha stood. The room stilled. "Judge," the officer said, "describe what occurred on the night of March 12th. She inhaled once. "I was driving home from work." Officer Rayner initiated a stop without probable cause. His tone was immediately confrontational. "When I asked what I had done wrong, he accused me of being argumentative and ordered me out of my car. He told me, quote, 'You people always think you can question authority.'" The courtroom murmured. The line everyone had heard online now carried weight in a legal record. Rayner's attorney rose. "Objection, out of context," and the hearing officer waved him down. "Overruled. Continue." Aisha's voice remained level. "He escalated the situation until dispatch confirmed my identity. Only then did his demeanor change." Rayner's attorney approached, all smoothed charm and quiet aggression. "Judge Monroe, you admit you're a public figure. Would you agree that this attention benefits your reputation?" Her eyes didn't waver. "You believe humiliation benefits my reputation. Public sympathy can be advantageous. So can accountability," she said. A few muffled chuckles rippled through the back benches. The attorney paced. "You also gave a televised interview, correct?" "Yes, in which you implied systemic bias within law enforcement." "I didn't imply," she corrected. "I stated a fact." He smiled thinly. "Facts are subjective in matters of perception. Justice isn't." Silence. Then the hearing officer motioned for him to move on. "Judge Monroe," the attorney continued, "is it possible the officer felt threatened by your tone or behavior?" Aisha blinked slowly. "Threatened by compliance. You raised your voice at one point, did you not? After being ordered to the ground without cause." "Yes, my voice rose, as any human voice might when dignity is under assault." Rayner leaned forward. "She was smug," he muttered. "Too loud." The room froze. The hearing officer looked up sharply. "Officer Rayner, you'll remain silent unless addressed." Aisha turned her gaze toward him, calm but surgical. "Is that how you saw me that night too, officer? Smug?" He stared back, jaw tight. "You people always look smug when you think you're above the law." The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, reporters scrambling to record. The hearing officer's gavel struck hard. "Order!" Rayner's attorney buried his face in his hands. "Officer, please." But Aisha didn't flinch. She held Rayner's gaze. "And yet, I was the one treated like a criminal." His face reddened, but he said nothing. The gavel hit again. "We'll take a brief recess." Outside the hearing room, the hallway swarmed with noise, journalists shouting questions, activists chanting, officials whispering damage control. Daniel found her near the stairwell. "You handled that perfectly." "I didn't need to," she said quietly. "He handled it for me." He shook his head. He couldn't help himself. That's the thing about power. It always exposes itself when threatened. Aisha leaned against the cold marble wall. "They'll still try to bury this." "Not after that outburst. It's everywhere already." When the hearing resumed, the atmosphere had changed. Rayner looked smaller now. His bravado cracked. His attorney fumbled through procedural language like a drowning man reaching for driftwood. The department's representative attempted damage control. While the officer's comments were inappropriate, they don't necessarily demonstrate racial motivation. Aisha interrupted. They demonstrate contempt. Contempt rooted in assumption, and assumption rooted in race. The room went silent again. The representative cleared his throat. "Judge Monroe, this isn't about philosophy, it's about policy." "Then your policy is broken." The hearing officer raised a hand. "That's enough. We'll deliberate." An hour later, they returned. The findings were inconclusive. The phrase landed like a slap. Aisha listened, jaw steady, eyes unblinking. Rayner's attorney exhaled in relief. His client smirked again. But the victory was hollow. Everyone in the room, every camera, every witness, had heard the truth in his own words. As the room emptied, Daniel whispered, "They called it inconclusive, but the whole city heard guilty." Aisha gathered her notes. "Then, it's not over." He frowned. "What's next?" "Internal review appeals can be escalated to judiciary oversight," she said. "And by procedural rotation. Guess which division is next in line?" Daniel's eyes widened. "Yours." She nodded once. Fate's sense of irony, I suppose. Later that night, at home, she sat by the window again. The same rain tapped against the glass. The same city lights burned below. On her TV, news panels debated her ethics, her tone, her right to preside. Some demanded recusal. Others called her a symbol that. She turned the volume down and whispered to herself, "They still think this is about pride." It single quotes t. It was about survival in a system built to suffocate anyone who dared demand breath. And now, for once, that system would have to answer not to her rage, but to her reason. The morning after the hearing, the courthouse steps were a battlefield of signs, cameras, and divided chants. Half the crowd shouted her name with reverence. The other half demanded her removal. Aisha watched from her office window, expression neutral. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. Reporters, colleagues, anonymous threats. She silenced it. Daniel entered, carrying 2 coffees. "They're calling it the most explosive hearing in years." "Explosive doesn't mean effective," she said flatly. He set the cup beside her. "The oversight committee's already moving. They're convening an emergency session. Not about Rayner, about you." She finally turned. "Expected. They're framing it as a conflict of interest, saying your comments compromised judicial neutrality." Her tone didn't shift. "Neutrality has never saved anyone who looks like me." Daniel hesitated. "They'll push for suspension. Then they'll have to do it publicly." The committee chamber was smaller, colder. A long mahogany table, 7 officials, all older, all white, all visibly uneasy. The seal of the judiciary loomed behind them. Aisha sat opposite, alone. No lawyer, no advocate, just her, the very embodiment of what they called a disciplinary concern. The chairman began, "Judge Monroe, the panel appreciates your attendance on short notice. This proceeding concerns your conduct following the March 12th incident." "Conduct," she repeated. Double quotes. "Yes. Specifically, your public remarks regarding systemic bias and your appearance at the officer's hearing. It's the view of this panel that such actions may erode public confidence in judicial impartiality." Aisha folded her hands. "Public confidence eroded long before I opened my mouth. I simply refused to pretend otherwise." The chairman frowned. "That's precisely the problem. Your refusal." Another member, a woman with sharp glasses, interjected, "Judge, your words carry institutional weight. You've accused law enforcement of bias. Insinuated that officers act with racial prejudice." "I didn't insinuate," Aisha said. "I described." The woman stiffened. "Be that as it may, we must protect the perception of fairness." "Perception," Aisha murmured, "is what allowed injustice to survive for centuries. The illusion of balance, while the scales were nailed to one side." The chairman's voice hardened. "This isn't a lecture hall, Judge Monroe. You're here to answer for your deviation from judicial decorum." "Decorum," she repeated quietly, "not justice." He ignored the jab. "Your interview statements, and now your testimony, have drawn political attention we cannot afford. The department has received multiple complaints alleging bias on your part." "Bias in favor of equality," she said. "Bias nonetheless," he replied coldly. Daniel waited outside the chamber. He could hear the echoes through the heavy doors, firm, clipped voices, and Aisha's measured replies. When she emerged an hour later, she looked unchanged. He asked nothing. "They'll deliberate," she said simply. "And they'll suspend me." "You sound certain." "They need to prove control. The system never tolerates rebellion within its own ranks." The suspension letter arrived 2 days later, effective immediately. "Pending further review. Official reason: public breach of judicial neutrality." Unofficial reason: she made them look in the mirror. She placed the letter on her desk, next to a photo of her father, a civil rights lawyer, who'd once told her that change begins the moment silence ends. She whispered, "Then let it begin." News broke within the hour. Judge who accused police of racism suspended. Judicial ethics or political theater. Rayner cleared, Monroe punished. Is this justice? The city ignited again. Marches swelled. Students walked out of classes. Clergy stood at podiums quoting her testimony. Hashtags filled feeds. Hashtag stand with Monroe and hashtag justice without fear. But power answered with precision. Anonymous leaks smeared her record. Old rulings were twisted into accusations of bias. Anonymous sources claimed she harbored resentment toward law enforcement. Daniel slammed his laptop shut. They're orchestrating a This is coordinated. They're protecting their hierarchy, Aisha said. When truth threatens the order attacks the truth. He looked at her, frustrated. And you're just going to sit here and let them? Her gaze was steady. No, I'm going to expose them on their own terms. A week later, she filed an appeal, not for reinstatement, but for a public transparency review of the entire disciplinary system. A procedural loophole buried in the judiciary's charter allowed any suspended judge to request such a review. It hadn't been invoked in over 50 years. The request landed like a bomb. The oversight board scrambled. If approved, the review would open internal communications, hearings, and ethics decisions to public scrutiny. They couldn't risk that. But denial would look like concealment. They were trapped behind closed doors. The chairman raged. She's turning this into a spectacle. The woman with the glasses replied, if we deny the review, it feeds her narrative. If we grant it, we expose decades of internal bias claims. Then we find another route, he snapped. Personal conduct. We dig, and they did. Old acquaintances were contacted. Former clerks questioned. A rumor surfaced that Aisha had once represented a civil rights organization before her appointment. A technical ethics gray area. The story spread fast. Headlines reframed her as a radical in robes. That night, Aisha sat in silence, the city lights flickering against her walls. Her phone vibrated again, this time, a message from an unknown number. They'll bury you like they buried the others. Step back before it's too late. She stared at the text for a long time, then deleted it. She opened her laptop instead, began drafting her public statement for the upcoming review. Her opening line, they called me biased for recognizing bias. They called me unfit for demanding fairness. So be it. If truth disqualifies me, then the bench itself is unworthy of truth. Daniel entered quietly. You're making yourself a target. I already was, she said without looking up. He sighed. You could walk away. Walking away, she replied, is how injustice keeps its seat. Outside, protesters filled the street beneath her window. Their chants carried upward like waves, echoing not rage, but recognition. For the first time in years, the institution trembled, not because of chaos, but because someone within it refused to kneel. The day of the transparency review dawned under gray skies. The courthouse plaza was packed. Cameras, protest banners, a wall of police barricades. Reporters' voices clashed with chants from both sides. Justice for Monroe, protect the courts. Inside, the air was electric. The hearing room, normally sterile, felt alive with tension. Every seat was filled. Journalists, lawyers, students, activists. At the far end sat the 7-member oversight board, flanked by 2 ethics prosecutors. Aisha entered last. Calm, black suit, no jewelry, no expression. The murmurs dropped to silence. The chairman adjusted his microphone. Judge Monroe, this review convenes to examine your allegations of institutional bias within the judiciary, and to address the conduct that led to your suspension. You may proceed. Aisha stood. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Her voice was even, not loud, but commanding. She set a small stack of folders on the podium. These documents are records of dismissed bias complaints against law enforcement personnel, cases mishandled, buried, or denied hearing due to procedural technicalities. Each one represents a life that never received justice. The first prosecutor leaned forward. Your Honor, the purpose of this review is to address your conduct, not to reopen prior cases. Everything is connected, she replied. My conduct was a response to a pattern this institution refuses to see. The chairman interjected. You're out of order. She met his gaze. So was my arrest that day. Yet, here we are. A ripple went through the crowd. Cameras clicked in rapid bursts. Daniel, sitting in the back row, watched her pace. Every move was deliberate. She wasn't fighting for reinstatement. She was building a record. Next exhibit, Aisha said. Internal memos between judicial offices discussing public image management following high-profile racial incidents. Words like containment and optics are repeated dozens of times. Justice, however, is mentioned once. The female board member spoke. tone icy. You've clearly come prepared. But these selective excerpts are direct quotes. Aisha cut in. Would you like the full documents entered into record? The woman fell silent. The first prosecutor changed strategy. Judge Monroe, are you claiming that every member of this board, and by extension this court system, is complicit in racial bias? Aisha paused, then said quietly, no, I'm claiming that silence is complicity, and silence has been your only consistent policy. Someone in the audience clapped. Another joined. The chairman slammed the gavel. Order. The sound echoed, sharp and futile. Aisha continued. When I was dragged from my car by Officer Rayner, this institution demanded I remain calm, composed, professional, even as I was dehumanized. You called it decorum. I call it the luxury of those who will never be pulled over for their skin. Gasps. Cameras zoomed in. The chairman's voice rose. Judge Monroe, you're turning this proceeding into political theater. No, she said. You already did that when you chose to punish the truth instead of the lie. Outside, the hearing streamed live. Across the city, cafes, classrooms, and offices had screens tuned to her testimony. A young black student whispered, she's saying what they never let us say. A police captain muttered to a colleague, she's destroying the department's credibility. A mayor's aide texted, we need damage control now. Back inside, the chairman tried to reclaim authority. You've made your point. We will reassess for deliberation. Aisha's response stopped him mid-motion. Not yet. You haven't heard the recording. Whispers rippled. Daniel stood, holding a USB drive. He walked it to the evidence clerk. The chairman frowned. What is this? Audio from the internal committee meeting 3 weeks ago. Aisha said, your discussion about me. The clerk inserted it. Static, then voices. She's dangerous. If we let her speak, she'd turn the public against us. Find something personal, professional, anything. Make it stick. The room froze. The voices were unmistakable. The chairman, the female member, 2 prosecutors. The chairman shot up. This is inadmissible. It's truth, she said, and truth doesn't need permission. The audience erupted. Flashbulbs strobed like lightning. Reporters shouted questions. Daniel's pulse pounded. He looked at Aisha, unflinching, composed, but her eyes gleamed with controlled fury. Security rushed forward as the board tried to end the session, but Aisha spoke over the chaos. You call me biased for seeing what's right in front of us, but what's more biased, my outrage, or your silence? Her voice carried through the hall, over the noise, over the decades of unspoken complicity. By evening, the clip had gone viral. Hashtag the recording trended worldwide. Commentators debated ethics, legality, bravery, danger. For once, the narrative wasn't controlled by the boardroom. It was owned by the people who'd long been silenced by it. That night, an emergency statement was issued. The Judicial Oversight Board is under internal investigation following leaked audio. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Daniel found Aisha outside the courthouse, standing under the rain, her face lit by streetlights and flashing cameras. He said softly, you realize they'll come harder now. She nodded. They already are. But you won. She turned to him, voice low. No. I told the truth. Winning would mean the truth mattered. They stood there as sirens wailed in the distance, not for her this time, but for the collapsing walls of an institution that had finally been forced to look at itself. The camera crews closed in, reporters shouted. Aisha's voice cut through one final time, calm and unshaken. I was never on trial. The system was. 2 weeks later, the headlines had quieted, but the silence was not peace. It was pressure. Public outrage still simmered. Investigations had begun. Committees were dissolving, statements retracting. But for Aisha, the noise outside only deepened. The stillness inside, her home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a watchtower. Curtains half drawn, news muted. Anonymous letters slid under the door, some praising her courage, others cursing her existence. Daniel visited daily. He'd stopped trying to convince her to rest. He found her seated at the dining table, surrounded by printed documents, public petitions, legal drafts, official inquiries. Her suspension was still active, but her influence had grown beyond any courtroom. You're all over the news again, he said, setting down a newspaper. She didn't look up, still twisting it. He nodded. They're calling you the face of rebellion in the judiciary. Some networks are painting you as dangerous, others a savior. Both labels are lies, she said. I'm just the one who stopped pretending. He sat across from her. The board's chair resigned this morning. The female member too. The ethics prosecutor under investigation. She finished. I saw the notice. You started an earthquake, Aisha. She smiled faintly. Earthquakes don't start change. They expose what's unstable. Outside, a small protest gathered near her apartment complex. Students with hand-painted signs, reading "Truth has no bias" and "Stand with Judge Monroe." From her window, she watched them chant, their voices echoing up through the cold air. It filled her with something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in weeks. Not hope, but connection. Yet beneath it lingered fear. Fear not for herself, but for the next person who would speak and be silenced. She whispered, they'll find another me, sooner than later. That evening, Daniel scrolled through social media. You should read this, he said, turning his laptop toward her. It was an op-ed titled "The System on Trial." The byline, "Anonymous Court Insider." The piece detailed everything: the secret meetings, the pressure to suppress biased complaints, the manipulation of ethics boards. It confirmed everything Aisha had claimed. She leaned closer. Whoever wrote this had access. Someone inside. Daniel said, maybe your testimony woke a few consciences. Her expression softened. Then it was worth it. He hesitated. You don't regret it. Not your position, your reputation, your safety. She met his eyes. Regret belongs to those who stayed silent. Days later, the Federal Justice Department announced a full, independent investigation into systemic misconduct across multiple districts. Her case was cited as the catalyst. The irony: a suspended judge had restored faith in justice, more than the system itself ever had. Still, consequences remained. She received an official notice. Her resignation had been accepted in the interest of institutional stability. Daniel read the letter aloud, his voice bitter. They're cleaning house by throwing you out first. It's their way of rewriting the ending, she said. So, you're just going to let them? Aisha folded the paper carefully. They can erase my title. They can't erase what happened on record. That's permanence enough. Later that night, she walked through the nearly empty courthouse one last time. Security nodded at her, not with suspicion, but respect. The halls smelled of old wood and paper, the kind that remembered too much. She stopped before courtroom 3A, the place where Raynor had stood, the same room where she had dared to speak. Her fingertips brushed the bench's surface. For all its weight, she whispered, justice was never in the wood, it was in the courage to use it. Outside, the air was cool, the city quieter now that protests had faded into policy debates. Reporters still lingered, hoping for one final quote. She gave them none. Daniel caught up with her on the steps. So what now? I'm not done, she said. He raised a brow. Without the robe, without the bench, what's left? The truth doesn't need a bench, she replied. It just needs a voice. I still have mine. Weeks later, Aisha appeared again, not in a courtroom, but at a public forum on justice reform. Hundreds attended. Cameras streamed live. She spoke without notes. Her words were quiet but sharp, like glass. They thought removing me would silence me. But what they never understood is that justice was never theirs to give. It belongs to those who demand it. I was called biased for seeing bias, unfit for speaking truth, ungrateful for exposing power. If that's the cost of honesty, then every system should be willing to pay it. The hall erupted in applause. Among the crowd were young law students recording, inspired, awakened. Daniel watched from the back, a faint smile crossing his face. He knew she had lost everything she'd built, yet somehow gained something far larger. Later that night, she stood alone by the reflecting pool outside the venue. City lights shimmered across the water, fractured yet beautiful. She thought of the officer who had insulted her, the board that had condemned her, the system that had broken and rebuilt her. She whispered to the reflection, you can't reform what refuses to see itself, but you can make it impossible to look away. The water rippled, distorting her image, judge, activist, survivor, all fading into one. The final headline appeared days later. Federal Review expands. Monroe case sparks nationwide reforms. It was small, almost understated, buried beneath political noise, but it marked a turning point. And in a modest apartment miles away, Aisha Monroe folded the paper, exhaled deeply, and allowed herself one brief moment of peace. Her phone buzzed again. Messages, invitations, interviews, but she didn't answer. Not tonight. She stood by the window, the city stretching before her like a restless truth she'd finally forced awake. Let them rebuild, she murmured. This time, maybe they'll remember who it was for. The light faded, the rain began, and in that quiet, she smiled. not in triumph, but in knowing. Justice, after all, was never about victory, it was about visibility. A year passed, the headlines had long since moved on, replaced by new scandals, new names, new outrages. But Aisha Monroe's name still lingered like a quiet echo in the nation's conscience. She no longer wore the robe, her old courtroom sat unused, its walls repainted, her nameplate replaced by someone younger, safer, and far less outspoken. Yet, outside the courthouse, a small brass plaque gleamed beneath the morning light, in honor of Judge Aisha Monroe, whose courage redefined silence. No official ceremony had installed it. Someone had bolted it there in the night. Aisha now lectured part-time at a community law center, teaching courses on ethics and systemic reform. Her students called her judge, even when she reminded them she wasn't one anymore. One morning, a young woman lingered after class, a first-year law student with trembling hands and bright, defiant eyes. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "my brother was arrested last month. Wrong place, wrong time. They tried to make him sign a confession. I told them I'd fight it." Aisha studied her, saw in her the same fire she'd once tried to hide. And what happened? "I made enough noise that they dropped it. But they told me I'd ruin my career if I kept talking." Aisha's voice was steady. "Then ruin it. Careers can be rebuilt. Silence can't." The student's lip trembled. "People call you brave. I think you were just honest." Aisha smiled faintly. "Bravery is just honesty in public." Outside, the world was changing slowly, unevenly, but undeniably. Several police departments had launched mandatory bias audits. Judicial boards were now required to make ethics reviews public. A new federal bill, the Monroe Transparency Act, had passed. Committee. Every reform carried resistance. Of course, politicians argued, commentators scoffed, but no one could ignore the footage that had once captured her voice echoing through the courtroom. "I was never on trial. The system was." That line had become a rallying cry, painted on murals, printed on protest banners, even quoted by senators. Yet Aisha never repeated it. She had no interest in being a symbol. Symbols, she knew, were easier to admire than to follow. Daniel visited often, though their conversations had changed. He was still a journalist, still relentless. "They're adapting your reforms faster than I expected," he said one evening, scrolling through his phone. "Half the judiciary's under review. Rayner's facing civil charges for falsified reports in another case." Aisha raised an eyebrow. "Poetic, isn't it?" He grinned. "Justice doesn't forget." "No," she said softly, "but it rarely forgives." He looked at her. "Do you?" She didn't answer immediately. The question hung heavy between them. Finally, she said, "Forgiveness isn't what he needs. Accountability is." That night, she sat on her balcony, city lights flickering below. The air was cool, almost kind. She thought of the people who had stood beside her, and those who hadn't, the officers who mocked her, the board that silenced her, the citizens who finally listened. She realized something simple. She had lost everything the world told her mattered: position, status, comfort, and gained everything that truly did. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Daniel stood at the door, holding an envelope, delivered to the center. He said, "No return address." She took it, opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No name, no header, just handwriting, neat, deliberate. "You don't know me. I was on that oversight board. You were right. We buried truth to preserve order. But when you spoke, something cracked in all of us. I resigned the next day. I hope someday you'll know the cost wasn't in vain." No signature. She folded it, set it beside her coffee mug, and whispered, "Maybe it wasn't." Months later, she attended a symposium in D.C., The Future of American Justice. She was introduced as the catalyst for reform, a title that made her wince. When she spoke, she ignored the script they'd given her. "I'm not here to talk about reform. I'm here to talk about memory. Systems forget because forgetting protects them. People remember because remembering changes them. Don't let the next injustice depend on another scandal, another video, another sacrifice. Make fairness ordinary, not extraordinary." The room fell silent. Then, applause, slow at first, then overwhelming. Later, a reporter caught up with her outside. "Judge Monroe, do you ever wish it had gone differently? That you'd stayed quiet, kept your position?" Aisha looked at her calmly. "If silence keeps you safe, then safety isn't freedom." The reporter hesitated. "Do you think justice has changed?" A faint, knowing smile. "Justice doesn't change. People do. The rest follows eventually." That evening, as she walked home, a child stopped her, a girl no older than 10, holding her mother's hand. Are you the lady from the videos? Aisha knelt. Which videos? The one who told the truth. A laugh escaped her. Maybe I am. The girl's eyes widened. My teacher says you made the rules fairer. Aisha smiled gently. Then make them fairer still. Promise. The child nodded solemnly. Promise. As they walked away, Aisha watched the small figure disappear into the crowd. Another voice, another generation. The legacy had already begun. At home. She stood again by her window, city lights reflecting against the glass. The brass plaque outside the courthouse glinted in the distance, barely visible, but she knew it was there. Her reflection stared back, older, calmer, unbroken. They thought justice was theirs to define, she whispered, but justice was never theirs to own. The clock ticked softly. Outside, the night deepened, quiet, vast, waiting. And in that stillness, Aisha Munro smiled. Not because the world was fixed, but because it was finally facing itself.